This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's just start. So I hope all of you can see the screen. So today we will be discussing about JVM. So this is how the agenda looks like. So what is JVM? Then we'll understand JDK, JRE. Then what are the JVM flavors? Different types of JVM available in the market. Then we'll go through the JVM architecture. Then these are three main types of three main parts of the JVM architecture. Uh, and the rest of these things, starting from JVM tuning till which JVM for your system low. So these four topics we will discuss after we have another session of Java heap. Because for JVM tuning and all these things for Java options and all these things, we also need to understand the heap structure and how it functions well. Okay, so so this is a performance engineering course, and then why do we need to study about JVM, or why do we need to understand JVM? So the case is, see, if you see 90% of applications that you're working on are using JVM. So what is actually so why they are using JVM? So JVM is just giving them a platform to run the code. Okay, so we'll just go to the slide and we'll discuss it more. So why it is important to understand JVM for performance engineering is that because it's used everywhere, right? What is a JVM? It's simple Java virtual machine, that gives you platform, that enables your computer to run your code, your Java programs, as well as some programs which are written in other languages. Okay, so as far as they are compatible with bytecode, right? So we know as far now that all the programming languages, may it be C, C Sharp, Python, Java, or any other languages, we may be writing the code in higher level, the user understandable format, but when at the compiling stage or when at the executing stage, the code has to be converted to a bytecode, because machine or computer does not understand the language that you're writing the code, right? They are only understanding the bytecode, and JVM works on that principle only. It works on the bytecode. So as long as your programming language is following that bytecode, you can run your program or you can run your application on JVM, right? So that's why JVM is very much popular for running your applications, right? So it's just an engine which provides a runtime environment to drive the Java code or application. Okay, so most of the time it is uh, it is not known, Java is actually developed with Vora. You can see that I've written over here. Vora is nothing but write once and run anywhere. So this was the concept behind developing this Java and JVM. So once you write the code, you can run it anywhere. Maybe may it be Windows, may it be Linux. You can see the JVM can be set up on Windows, Linux, Solaris. Name the OS, even your Mac OS. So wherever you want, you can set up a JVM and you can run the same code. You need not to change your code of application to in order to get it running on any other operating system, right? Because we are having this virtual machine platform, right? Okay, so what is the difference between your JDK and JRE? That we'll see the next part. But understand first that the Java virtual machine, it's a part of your JRE, right? So JRE includes Java virtual machine, right? Okay, so now you have so why we are discussing JDK and JRE, because lots of time it is a confusion. Why the JDK? Why do we need JDK or why do we need JRE? Right, for any particular application uh, supported. For any particular application to run. So, for example, you might have installed any application. Let's take an example of your load runner only. So if you are installing your load runner, you may need some dependencies to be installed. So for in case of load runner, instead of Java, they have most dependencies on .NET framework because it is developed in that language, right? So for JMeter, you will need a JDK or JRE, right? In the same way, why which part we need where? So to understand it, we need to first know that what is JDK and what is JRE and how they are different. So JDK, as the name suggests, is a Java development kit, right? So it has a SDK for developing the programs, writing the programs, right? It has some tools which can help you to create some programmable files that can be executed, right? And what is JRE? It's a package of everything that is necessary to run that whatever programs you're written or whatever programs you're compiled through the JDK or through the Java program, the Java C command, right? So the JVM cannot be used to create new programs. That is main thing. Sorry, JRE cannot be used to create new programs. It is only used to execute a program, or it is only used to run your programs, right? So JDK is capable of creating and compiling both, right? Creating and compiling the programs. After compilation, JDK will be giving the programs to run to other supported system like JRE and all this. So you usually, you see, let's start one question. If you have to run only a program, if you're just bothered about running an application, what part of this Java you will need? You will need JDK or you will need JRE?
So run
So
only the
you will,
application.
yeah,
Oh,
correct, JRE. So yeah,
JRE.
Chandra has
Yeah.
correctly answered. Yeah, so JRE. Because when we are running the application, we are least bothered about modifying it, right? So we just want to have an environment where the application code can execute, and JRE provides us that environment, right? But something or some applications specifically, they will require you to have JDK install as well. So most of the times you few of the requirements when you are installing some applications, or if you have this experience of deploying an application, you might see that first few environment variables are needed, like Java home, then your Java path, the class path, and likewise. So JDK bin directory and JRE bin directory should be there in your Java home, right? So there are few applications which actually needs JRE as well as JDK. So why do they need JDK? Because as per our understanding as of now, JRE is JRE. If you're supposed to run your application, you only need JRE. You don't need JDK. But why some applications ask for JDK also? So there are some needs, or there are some requirements of web applications which deals with JSP, so Java Servlet Pages. So for them, when they are actually getting executed, so in that execution, the JSP or the Java servlet is that needs to use the JDK to compile the servlets. Okay, so this JSP is getting converted into Java servlets. So for that purpose, they need JDK, because we already saw that JDK has these tools like compilation, Java doc, JDB. So all these different tools are present under the JDK, right? But so at the time of running, if your application is having some JSP pages, so the web application, it will need the JDK as well to convert that to the servlet, to execute their application code. Okay, clear as of now? Please feel free to interrupt me at any point of time if something is not clear to you guys. Okay. Okay. So let's move to the next slide. So as I said, now JVM flavors. So what do we understand from the JVM flavor? So we know that the Sun JVM understands the options. So this is typically for the two most popular JVMs. No, we will see that in the further next slide. So what are the different types of JVMs are available in the market? But before that, let's understand how the JVM works on which three basic principles, right? So for the Sun JVM, the Sun JVM understands three options. One is classic, the second is client, third is server, right? So if you remember in the demo session, I've shown you that simple jar file running, and I've shown you that it is loaded as hyphen the client. The Sun JVM was loaded as a hyphen client. Okay, so we will see that this again, when we'll have this hands-on session, and when we will deploy one sample application, we will try to find out which category that is using. Okay, so let's understand what is client, classic, and server. The three option means. So classic is, it disables the JIT compile. Okay, so classic means classic, no, the old fashioned. So it does not have it does not use the JIT compile, right? So client, next option is the default is client. What which the client is, it activates the JIT compile for hotspot. So just understand one thing, this classic, most of the time, I mean nowadays it is not used. So I think it will be, I mean in few more days or few more years, I think that will be reboot completely classic. But some of the times some Java programs need specific execution criteria, so that time they may use classic explicitly by mentioning, before running the JVM, they may specifically, and ask JVM to run on this configuration. But nowadays it's not used. Client is by default, it activates the hotspot JIT. Okay, so what is JIT? Java is JIT compilation. So same way, the third option, server, it also activates the server hotspot JIT, right? So the server hotspot JIT, it takes some time to, time to compile, time to warm up, but it delivers the best performance for a server. So understand the role of your JVM. So the application you are installed on your JVM, what its role. So if it is a client, or if it is a server. So if it is a server, so it should be a server. The JVM should start with this option, server. And if it's a client, client is by default. You don't need to give any specific option for your JVM to start with, right? Now, so what is this JIT? I mean, what hotspot JIT for clients? So it's just-in-time compilation. It speeds up your process of executing the code. We will get through it in the detail when we discuss the architecture. Okay. As for now, just understand for the Sun JVM there are three options: classic, client, and server, and both in both client and server there is a hotspot JIT activated. In server it is server specific hotspot JIT, right? Then for the second of most popular Java JVM, the hotspot JVM, it uses adaptive optimization. Okay, so there is no option like classic, client, and server. Okay, so it identifies, it tries to learn the code, type of code that has been deployed on JVM, or that has been running on your JVM, right? So it interprets it monitors it for some time, and then there are some background threads or some daemon threads that will compile the hotspot bytecode to native code, and the hotspot JVM is only optimizing the hotspot. Okay, so they are not changing anything in the code, they are just optimizing the hotspot. Okay, so it has more time than a traditional JIT to perform optimization, because in the traditional just-in-time compilation, the traditional JIT compilation that has been used by the Sun JVM, it has to go through some specific steps for some process. So first comes the bytecode, then it will scan for the different types of variables that are required for execution, then it optimizes it, and then it again executes it. So that's a cycle for optimization. But in hotspot it's not like that. It has a very much time available for optimization, because it does not go through the cycle. It will directly convert the hotspot. I mean, it is optimizing the hotspot, it is not optimizing your bytecode. Okay, then you have the hotspot JVM. It keeps the old byte codes around in case a method in case a method moves out of the hotspot. So it has some sort of functionality, or it's some arrangement that keeps your old byte codes running or saved somewhere else. And in case if your method is out of the hotspot, right, out of the execution area. Okay, so let's move forward. So this is clear now. As of now, the hotspot JVM, how this how the Sun JVM uses the three options. In Sun JVM, you can specify three different options explicitly: server, client, or classic. but the hotspot you don't need it. The hotspot JVM automatically it will interpret your code, whatever you are using the hotspot JVM to run on. So it will automatically interpret at the background. It will compile your code and it will optimize the hotspot. Instead of optimizing your bytecode, it will optimize the hotspot itself. It makes changes in itself, so the code whatever you're running should perform efficiently. Okay, so let's move forward. So this is a very long list now. The JVMs available in the market. So this is I took it from Wikipedia. So you can also go and see. So there are few more. I mean, uh, Hotspot and Sun JVM. Apart from that, there are a lot of other JVMs. Like you can see Adopt Open JDK. So they have some specific requirement, and they are again some of the JVMs are built on top of Hotspot, or some are built on top of open source JDK Azure systems. So there are different flavors of JVMs available in the market. Each one is having some different types of functionalities, right, from the previous JVM. So you can go through the list, but nowadays most of the time you will see the hotspot being used or Sun JVM being used for the bigger application. Hardly you can see this different types of implementation. Okay, hotspot as you know, open source Java implementation is there. There is some tiny JVMs are also there. It's called micro JVM. So these are the Java ME implementation. So we know that Java can be implemented in three ways. Either you have Java SE, Java EE, or Java ME, right? So Java ME is your Java Micro Enterprise Edition. So this is your micro JVM, which it just requires the things that are needed to run, right? Okay, now let's come to the main topic. Okay, so JVM architecture. So before going to JVM architecture, I'll just first explain why this need, why do we need to understand JVM architecture. Okay, so as a performance engineer, we will be dealing with most of the time we'll be dealing with the JVMs. Okay, so the application code or application server, may it be your middleware, may it be your web server, all of them will be running on a JVM, right? So there are two different types of performance tuning are involved in that case, or performance engineering we can say. First is with your application, right? If you face an issue with your application, the application level engineering should be there. Application level performance troubleshoot should be there. And second is with your infrastructure. So for your application, JVM is the infrastructure, right? Where your application is running or where your application is hosted. So that JVM has to be also efficiently performed or efficiently tuned, so in order to get most out of your application. So we are discussing about the JVM first. So when we are talking about JVM tuning, so we need to understand first what is JVM, right? Or what JVM understand, what is the architecture of JVM. Before tuning anything, we need to understand how it works. So that's when we will be able to give some options, or that's when we will be understand what parts to tune, which options we should use for this JVM in order to give the maximum throughput or give the maximum output of your on your for your application. Okay, okay, so any question as of now? So please let me know. What is hotspot? Okay, Sanu. So hotspot is it's just a name given by your IBM to the JVM. Like Oracle has named the JVM Suns JVM. So hotspot is name given by your JVM. But literally, if you see the hotspot, the meaning of hotspot, it's a part of your application code or a part of your JVM which is working up, or it is too worked up, right? The you can say in performance terms, you can say it's a bottleneck, the hotspot, right? We will discuss it when we go to the architecture. Okay, so let's move. So you can see on the screen, this is the architecture diagram of your JVM. So it's basically divided in your three subsystem, three main components. So one is, first is your class order subsystem, then comes your runtime data area, which is also called as JVM memory is here. So it is total comprehensive. It is called as runtime data area, and third part is your execution engine. So execution engine is also uh, complemented with native method area, and so this in under this native method area you have interface and libraries. Okay, so this is just an overall view, bird eye view. We will go through each and every component separately. Okay, so let's you can see this class loader is getting input on from JVM language classes, right? So what is JVM language classes? You might all we all you may all know, right? The Java file, when we write a Java code using JavaC, we compile it, right? From the Java file, it converts it into the class file, dot class file. So that dot class file is given as an input to this class loader. Okay, and what does that Java class file contains? It contains all the byte codes for all the classes you have defined in your .java file. So whatever you have programmed, whatever the classes you have mentioned in the .java file, once you compile it with your JavaC command, the class file will get generated with the same name of your Java file, and it will include the byte code for all the classes that are been defined in your Java file. Okay, and then this class file is given as an input to this class loader when it actually executes. Okay, so let's see how the class loader works, or what are the different parts of a class loader. Okay, so first thing is that this Java has some dynamic class loading functionality. So this class loader subsystem is basically designed to handle this class loading functionality. Okay, so it has uh, three main tasks to do the class loader subsystem. It has to load the class, it has to link, and it has to initialize it. Okay, so these three tasks are performed by your class loader subsystem, right? So what comes under loading? You see, there is bootstrap, there is extension, and there is application class loader. Then what comes in linking? Verify, prepare, resolve, and initialization, just initialization. Okay, so we'll see through each and every step what is actually happening. Okay, so we are not going into very detail, and we are not going in too much detail which is required for developer to understand. But as a performance engineer, we also need to have some idea of how these things are working, right? Or how these things are functioning. So we will be seeing just the whatever is required for a performance engineer to understand about the JVM architecture. Okay, so this is clear now as of now. So your class loader will get an input as a class file, Java class file. That class file will be containing the byte codes for all the classes that are defined in your Java file. And now the class loader subsystem has to do three main tasks. First is you're loading the classes, linking the classes, then initialize them. Okay, so let's see. And you can also see that this class loader has to communicate with this runtime data area. You can see these arrows to and fro. So it's a bi-directional communication between your class loader subsystem and your runtime data area. So we'll see how it communicates in the next. Okay, so let's first understand what type of classes are loaded, and what are bootstrap, what is extension, and what is application. Okay, so classes will be loaded by this component loading. Okay, so there are three hierarchies of classes. First is your bootstrap, then is your extension, and third is your application class name. Okay, so as you know, as the name suggests, bootstrap. So bootstrap is the path. uh, Bootstrap path we call as it's Java slash, it's mentioned on your slide, right? Java home, GRE, and library. Okay, it has the highest priority. Okay, so it is responsible for loading the. Oh, I think my screen is flickering. Guys, you are able to see my screen? Okay. So this is the Bootstrap class loader is just the class path. It is responsible. Bootstrap it loads the classes from the Bootstrap class path. So Bootstrap class path is nothing but the location of your library folder on your Java JRE of your JRE, right? So it has the highest priority. Just understand it. The Bootstrap class loader will have a highest priority over any other class. Then comes your extension class loader. Okay, let me just quickly check if I have. Okay, okay. Now you can see this is I have just navigated to the JRE of extension directory. So you can see there are different types of extensions available. So what extension class loader does, it is responsible for loading the classes which are inside the extension folder, JRE library extension. You can see this directory over here. So extensions are powerful. These are very powerful tools. So you can actually develop your own extension and you can put that extension in this directory. So at the time of execution, when your JVM starts up, it will also load that extension for your use. So most of the times developers use this extension to order in order to optimize or in order to modularize their code. Okay, so you can see there are different types of jars available, like access breach. Then you have something called CLD data, CLDR data. So I also don't know about much about all these different types of jar, but let's just keep in mind that there is some kind of extensions which you can include in this directory, and this extension will be loaded at the time of when the JVM has to run. Okay, then comes your application class loader. Okay, so what is application class loader? It is nothing but it loads your classes which is responsible for running your application. Okay, so the application class level has to be the class path has to be mentioned in your environment variable. Okay, so how the Java is implement this? It's the sun.miss.launcher dot dollar app class load. Okay, so this you can see in the different types of environment variables if you're running your JVMs on your uh, different hosted servers like Windows server or the Linux server. Okay, so all these classes, the class loaders, they will follow a delegated hierarchy algorithm. Okay, so application class loader. So for example, there is any application class loader has to be executed, or let's say there is function.java is the class inside an application, so it has to be executed. So it will delegate its execution to extension. Extension will then delegate it to the bootstrap, and the bootstrap will actually execute it. It will check if the class is available, then it will execute it. If it does not, it will again come back to the extension, and they can again go back to the bootstrap. So it goes in the cycle, and this is how it is executed. Okay, so this is loading part. Now I hope it is clear now. If any questions, please ask. Then we have the linking. Okay, so first step is done. Whatever the classes are available in your on the which are the classes are required for execution that are now loaded inside your JVM. Now the linking part. Okay, so what is happening in the linking part? Three main steps: your verify, your prepare, and visual. The first thing will be the bytecode which your class has been loaded, so that it will get verified whether it is having it for proper syntax or not, or whether it's written properly or not. Okay, if this verification fails, you will get a runtime exception like java.lang.verify error. Okay, so this steps first, evaluate the bytecode. Whatever the class bytecode has been generated after compilation, it will first verify it. Then if everything is clear, everything is green, the next step is to prepare. So what it is preparing? So in this stage, all the static variables will be allocated to the actual values or default values, whichever you are defined in the code, right? So whatever the static variables you are defined, int a, int b, string abc, whatever the variables you are defined, they will be actually allocated a memory or any default value if the default values are specified. For example, if tenure has been specified as 15, so that 15 will get automatically defined to the variable tenure and it will get its own memory allocated. Okay, so this is done in prepare stage, and then comes your next stage, which is resolve. Okay, so now verification is done, preparation is done, all the symbolic references have been replaced by their actual references, or they have been given by the actual location. Next step is to resolve, right? So this is what the resolve is done. The symbolic memory references are replaced with the original references from the method area. Okay, so the method area contains method stack and all everything related to the method that has been defined in your class file. So all the symbols or all the variables that you are using throughout your code, that will have some references, right? So those references will be replaced with your original references from method area. So if int a is declared in your class file under this resolve stage, that will be mapped to the method area. So where is that int a? Okay, the last step is last functionality of or last task of the class builder is to initialize. After this everything is done, it will initialize the class. Okay, so what is actually done when the class is initialized is all the static variable will be assigning the original values and the static block will be executed. Okay, so this is top to bottom approach, or it follows the it gets executed in top to bottom approach. Okay, so parent to child class hierarchy is the same way that the hierarchy we saw. The application class will delegate it to the extension, extension will delegate to the bootstrap. Again, bootstrap will check if it's there. If it's not, then it will go back to the extension, and extension will again check it with application, and then the cycle continues. Okay, so this is how this loading is this class loader works. The three basic tasks: loading, linking, and initialization. Okay, once this is done, we have seen in the previous stage that it has to communicate with the uh, runtime data area continuously, right? So what is in the runtime data area, we'll see next. Okay, so you can see this is the basic bird eye view of your runtime data area. It has to be, in communication with or in sync with your class loader subsystem as well as the remaining parts of your JVM, like execution engine and native method area. Okay, so it has five different components, your runtime data area. So first major is your JVM heap. So in JVM memory, you have method area, you have heap area, then is your stack, then your PC register and native meta stack. Okay, so now let's understand here first now. So this is your JVM architecture, right? Now we can see this thread 1, thread 2 and thread in understand stack area. Okay, so now my question to you guys is, so let's say when you are running an application on your JVM, when there are multiple threads are getting created for your application, where these threads will be getting created, inside the JVM memory or on the server memory? Please answer. It may be wrong, it may be right. Please answer. Let me know if you don't understand the question. I will repeat it. Okay, I got one answer from Chandra. Okay, so Saran wants me to repeat the question. So Sano, the question goes like that. So whenever you are running an application on your JVM and there are multiple threads are getting created, so which area or which memory these threads uses? The area or the memory of JVM or the memory of your server on which your JVM is hosted? Okay, so I think as of now only Chandra has answered correctly. Server memory. So uh, this is why it is it is required to understand the architecture of HTML, or this is why it is needed. Most of the times I feel, I mean, I've seen guys getting confused with the thread memory area and the JVM memory area. So anytime a new thread is getting created, it will use the server memory. Okay, so there is a specific formula of how much memory your thread is getting, how much memory of your single thread should use, or how many maximum threads you can support, or how many maximum threads your JVM can support with the available memory you have on your server. Okay, so we will discuss this in the next upcoming slide. So as of now, just keep in mind that this your runtime data area is it's very important part, and it is divided in your five different things: your method heap, your stack, EC, and a native method stack. Okay, let's go and see one by one. Okay, so first is your method area. So what's there in the method area? As the name suggests, all the class level data, right? What is class level data? The class's name, immediate parent class, methods, variables, everything that you define in your Java file. Okay, so everything it will be getting stored in your method area, right? Only, and you need to understand there is only single method area per JVM, right? So inside one JVM, you can have only one method area. Okay, so you cannot run two applications on single JVM, right? If you have to deploy both of the applications on a JVM, you need a different JVM, or you need to merge the code for both of the application, right? So for the end user, it may sound two different application, and at the end, it is running on the same JVM, but the code is merged. So understand this thing. So therefore, there is only one method area and one heap area for every JV. Okay. So what is heap area? Again, we will discuss this topic at large in upcoming session. But as of now, heap area is the area where all the objects corresponding to your variables and arrays is getting created, and they are stored. Okay. So both this area, this is a shared resource, right? So method area is a shared area. I forgot to mention that it is a shared resource, method area. And heap area also shares the memory for multiple threads, right? So that's why it is called as it's not a thread safe, right? There is some concept of thread safing, right? So heap area is not a thread safe area because it is shared across the different types of threads, right? So multiple threads are using this heap area to load their objects, load their arrays and variables, right? So heap area is not a thread safe, just keep in mind that. Then comes your stack area. You can see that in the memory. So what is there inside in the stack? We have different types of threads created. Okay, so each and every thread will have its own memory allocated inside the stack. Okay, so each and every thread will have its stack frame, will include the LVA, the operand stack, the D. Okay, so local variable array, your operand stack, and the frame data. So what is stack area? So you can see the diagram represents this very well. So thread 1 has its separate entity, thread 2 has its separate entity, thread n has its separate. So for every thread, its area is private, or you can say it is limited for that thread only, right? So it is a thread safe area. We can call it as a thread safe because whatever the stack frame of thread 1, thread 2 cannot access it, right? Or whatever the local variable array of thread 2 is there, thread 1 cannot access it. So that's why it is a uh, thread safe area. Okay, so stack area is a thread safe since it does not share the resources. Okay, so under the stack frame, what are the three different options? You can say this is local variable array, operand stack, and frame data. So just to understand what is local variable array, it is related to the method, how many local variables are involved, and corresponding values that will be stored in your local variable array. Operand stack is there, which is the immediate operation is required to perform. So the operand stack is storing that operation. Then the frame data will contain the corresponding methods, right? In case of any exception, the catch block, try catch block that we define in the program. So that will be that information. If it is running through an exception, that a catch the exception which is in cache, that will be stored in your frame data. And when we take the stack trace, so this entire data will be presented to us. The local variable, operand stack, and the frame data. Okay. Now let's move to the next, which is your PC register. So PC register is nothing but, I mean, if you have been, if you have gone through the machine coding, or the in your engineering days, or in your computer science study, how the code executed, there has to some accumulator was there, some PC registers are there. So these are the same PC register. So it just stores the bytecode of next task to be executed, the next current execution instruction, and it will update the next execution instruction. Okay. Then comes your native method stacks. Okay, so there is some noise. Okay, so it's clear now, Sanu? Okay. Okay, so we are discussing about the native method stack. Okay, so there are a lot of planes flying on this line. Okay, so this is native method stacks, nothing but it holds all the native method information. For every thread, separate native method stack will be created. Okay, so likewise the thread safe area, this is also on a thread safe area. So native method stack is nothing but the native methods, like for the applications we call native applications, or the crossover application. So likewise, so native method stack will implement the same area like stack, but it is for the native methods. Okay. Okay, now let's see the last part. Okay, so this is your execution engine. Now here comes how your JVM is executing the task. So you can see that execution engine. What are native methods? Okay, so the native methods are all the methods which are being used by your JVM for the native operations. Like, so for example, you can see if you go move to the Java directory, if when we are loading these classes inside your Java directory, so all the, let me just show. Okay, you can see this rt.jar file. So all these native methods will be included inside this rt.jar. So what are the native methods? So native methods, like when you are declared a string. Okay, so when you have, so or you are using the inbuilt, or all the classes that you are importing in your code, right? When you are writing your code, you import like Java util.io, different types of packages, right? So all these methods are native methods. So you're not actually writing the specific code for your function, but you're just importing that classes, and you're expecting to use that function available in that package, or function available in those classes. So all those methods are native methods. Okay, which are actually involved, actually there in the Java folder or the Java libraries. I cannot show you over here because, sorry, no, not here. No, that is the rt.jar only, where you can see this all the native methods are loaded in the library folder. This is the jar file. All your bootstrap, all the classes are loaded here. So all these your native methods are compiled in this jar. So everything that's like starting from the as simple as like string, defining the string. So what has to done, so calling a string or string operations, like replacing a string or finding, and whatever the operations you are doing in your application code, which are not related to the application's specific functionality, are your native methods. Okay, so like if we give an example, in C language, you are defining an int variable C, right? And at the later part of the time, in the code, you are changing that C to the C, you're giving some value to the C. So int C, this first statement, so we'll understand, for the machine will understand that C, the type of variable C is integer. Okay, so for it will call native method to understand it, what is C, what is integer. Okay, so I hope that was sufficient. Okay, so let's go to the next part. So runtime data area, so it is very important. So the execution engine, which is very important. So execution engines communicates with the runtime data area in bi-directional way, like the same way that we have observed for the execution engine, for the runtime data area, which which was communicating with your class loader subsystem and your execution engine. Execution engine is the last part of your JVM. Okay, so you can see this, it is again, it has three main components. First is your interpreter, then your JIT compiler, and the main part is your memory management tool, like garbage collection. Then it has some subsystems like native method interface and native method library. So again, it comes over here. Okay, so now let's discuss what is the each and every part will do. Okay, okay. So interpreter, as the literal name suggests, it is interpreting, right? So whatever bytecodes we have already fed to the class to the subsystem, and it is traveled till to the execution engine, it interprets the bytecode. Okay, and like it always remember, the bytecode is always executed sequentially, line by line, one by one, right? So interpreter interprets the bytecode faster but executes slowly. So why that, we'll see now. So So there is one disadvantage as I mentioned, that whenever a single method or single call, so for example, we can say the recursion, right? The recursion program. If that is being called, so same, it is executing the same program, right? But it is again, it needs to interpret it every time. Every time the loop is being called, every time it needs the interpretation. That makes it slow. Okay, so now to improve that, the next part comes in the picture, the JIT compiler. After your interpretation, next part is your JIT compiler. So what JIT compiler will do, it will neutralize the disadvantages of interpreter, right? So interpret has to interpret everything every time, right? Even if you execute the single line of code multiple times, or the same code multiple times, it has to interpret it every time, right? So what a JIT compiler will do, it will be eliminating this. And how it will do it, it will compile the entire bytecode, and it will change it to the native code. Okay, so this native code then will be used directly for the repeated method calls. Okay, so we'll see how it's done. Okay, so now you can relate this JIT compiler to the previous the topmost slide that we discussed about, right? Sun JVMs, how it deals with the three different methods are there, right? Server, client, and classic. And in the hotspot, there are no different methods it interprets. So the Sun methods, this is how it improves the performance. It has the JIT compiler. It will directly it will modify your bytecode, to in order to give the better performance of execution. In the hotspot area, hotspot in the hotspot JVM, the JVM itself gets modified, right? So that it can perform better with the whatever application it has been given, or whatever bytecode it has given, right? So how JIT compiler will do that modification or optimization? You can see the three stage involved in your JIT compiler, of rather four. Your intermediate code generator is there. then is your code optimizer, and then is your target code generator, and there is one more step, profiler. So profiler most of the time is not used for optimization. Okay, so these only three stages are used for optimization: your intermediate code generator, your code optimizer, and your target code generator. Okay, so what is your intermediate code generator? Just, it is very literal. Just produce the immediate intermediate code. What is your code optimizer? It is responsible for optimizing the intermediate code generated above. And how the target code generator, how it will do? Target code generator is responsible for the generating machine code or native code. So now how this happens? So this cycle is repeated. So intermediate code generation, code optimizer is it is actually optimizing the bytecode. So how it is doing it? It analyzes the bytecode at the execution, then it appends, if there are some calls or native calls can be generated out of that bytecode. If it is executing multiple times, that code optimizer will generate that block as a native method, and it will store that in the native method stack. You can see that it is communicating with native method interface and native method level, right? So how this cycle will continue? So code optimizer will understand from interpreter that the same code is coming again and again to execute. So what code optimizer will do? It will convert that same the block of code which is getting executed again and again to a native method. Okay, and it will store that in the native method area. So next time when that again same block is coming to execute, so instead of again doing everything, it will code optimizer will directly ask to ask that call to get fetched from the native method area. So native methods are faster than your application classes being executed. Okay, so understand. So this is how it's done. And the last component, which is your profiler, it's a special component. So Java developers, or sometimes we also use it, the profiler tool, to identify whether method call is multiple times or not, right? The same for the same purpose we use this profiler tool. Okay, next, and the next component is your garbage collection. We very much are aware about it. What is garbage collector? What is its function? Okay, so it's a part of execution engine. So it collects, okay, I have some question, let me just quickly take it. Yes, interpreter and JIT compiler both will be used in execution engine. Yes, Chandra. So let me just go back to the previous. Okay, so interpreter is necessary for the interpreting the bytecode. Okay, so compilation, under the compilation we are just compiling the bytecode, we are just verifying the syntaxes are done or proper or not, right? So we already seen that in the previous stage, that verify, repair and resolve. So everything is done, but interpreter is doing what has to done, right? Compiler will identify what is done, uh, what how it has to do, the interpreter will do it, what action has to be done, right? And this interpreter is necessary every time the execution, every time your command is run, the interpreter has to be there. Interpreter has to be there. So that's why this particular Sun JVM, they have introduced this JIT compile. Okay, so this particular execution engine architecture, if you particularly observe for the hotspot JVM, there are some different components, or I mean they have the same level, same type of implementation, but the working methodology is different for hotspot. Because they don't optimize the code, they don't optimize the bytecode, they optimize the basic structure of JVM, the basic this particular model execution engine. So how they are getting, how this bytecode should execute, but interpreter is necessary for every code to be executed. Okay, so so we were discussing about the garbage collector. So we all know that it's a part of your memory management tool, garbage collection, and it's a part of your execution engine. So there are two ways your garbage collection can be called. So one is your system.gc, when the system feels the requirement of garbage getting collected. If it triggers itself, the system.gc, or otherwise you can have a finalized method. Okay, so all the new so what all the young objects that are getting created, that can be garbage collected through the system.gc. But if inside the code or inside the programming, if you have created few of the objects without using the new statement, or without or these objects are new, not new, they are reused or they are restructured from the inside the code. So in that case, the developer has to use the finalize method, okay, to perform the cleanup. So anyway, it's just like the temp area, for a temporary variable. If you are using some temporary objects inside the code for some temporary work done, and you need to clean up that using the finalize. So this is the responsibility of developer to use this finalize method. Okay, so this is your garbage collector. Now there are two different components. You have seen that native method libraries and your native method interface and your native method libraries. So what is native method libraries and interface? It is, again, it will be interacting with your execution engine in bidirectional and with the runtime data area at the same time. Okay, so all the C++ are libraries that are called the native libraries. Okay, it is, these are hardware specific again. So whatever is required. So just in other words, for Chanda, your earlier question, what are the native methods you asked, right? And what are the native libraries? So all these things which are required for your JVM to work, these are native methods. So this can also include the specific methods or specific area or specific libraries which are, again, which can help your application code to execute. Okay, so let me just quickly show you the JV or JVisual VM, and I will be in a better position to explain. So you might be aware about daemon threads, right? There are two types of threads in your JVM. One is your application thread, and then is your daemon threads. So the same way the understanding of daemon threads is the same understanding of your native threads. Native methods. Okay. Okay. Now we can see this is the visual VM JVM. You can see there are live threads at 26. 21 out of it are daemon threads. Okay. So what are these daemon threads? So these are the threads which are required for JVM to work on, right? So whatever the input you are giving to the visual VM, or if you are using your visual VM to monitor any other JVM, so that will create another live thread. But these are the 20 daemon threads which are there already. As soon as your visual VM started, these threads are there. So your GC is again a daemon thread. So all these threads should be there. So you can see this finalizer thread is also there. Keep alive timer. So these are the threads which are required for your JVM to work on. In the same way, your native methods are like the methods which are required for your execution engine to work, right? So it is doing all these operations like interpreting and your intermediate code generation. So for all these operations, these operations are defined and mentioned in your native method interface, and all the JNI calls we can see, right? So for example, if you connect to the JNI console, RMI or JNI console like J console, it is again a native method. It is a native method call. Okay, so I hope you are able to understand this overall architecture. Okay, guys. So any questions? As of now, I think I'm done with now. You want me to answer any more or elaborate any specific topic you might not got properly, please let me know. So this is the agenda that we discussed. So we discussed first what is JVM, why we need to understand the architecture of JVM in order to be a good performance engineer. What are the differences in your JDK JRE? Then we saw that different JVM flavors for hotspot and your Sun's JVM. So your Sun has three options like client, server, and classic. Okay, then we yeah. Thanks, Sanam. So different JVMs that are available in the market, we also saw that. Then we have also seen that we have gone to the architecture, JVM architecture entirely. Okay, and then we have seen that different components under JVM like class loader, runtime data area, and execution engine. And we also seen that the insights of all these three components. Now for the next session, so these four topics are remaining like JVM tuning, what are the Java options, how what are the considerations that should be made before you're tuning the JVM, and which JVM has you should use for your system. So these topics we will discuss after we have some understanding on Java heap. So next session will be about your heap memory and all the details. Okay, once that session is done, we will have another in the next session, next to next session. We will use a sample application. We will try to deploy the sample application, and we will try to apply all the things that we have understood as of now till now regarding JVM and the heap and all these things, and we will see how we can apply all these things in the real world. Okay, so we will deploy an application, we will run that application on Tomcat, and before that we will configure the application with different Java options, and we will see how this application behaves with monitoring and in the upcoming sessions. Okay, so as of now I'm done, guys. If any questions, please let me know. I'm there for again 2 more minutes. Tomorrow, yeah. Our next class is the same time tomorrow. We will be discussing about the heap area. So actually, I was trying to show you guys the hotspot server. Here it is using the Java hotspot server, hotspot PM. So that's why we are not able to see any specific the class, classic server and all that the Sun's JVM use, right? The modes. So in my office, in my at my workplace, we are having the Sun VM. So we have this specific modes like server and client. So this
Hello.
visual VM is running on the hotspot. So we are not able to see that mode.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, no, tell me.
So the demo threads are not working with any application. They are only working with the they are not these are threads that is not actually attached to any application. They are not actually handling any application.
No, daemon threads are specifically the threads which are there to run to perform the functionality of your JVM. Okay, so I can explain in more better terms. So let's take an example of your Windows system, operating system. Okay, now if I go to Task Manager, uh, and I go, if I see the processes tab, right? So there are different types of processor I can see, like, so this is mail, there is Google Chrome. So these are the applications I'm running, right? But if I filter out these processes from the system processes, okay, you can see this com surrogate, this bonjour service, application framework. So these are the services that are, these are running by the system, right? So these are not my services. So I'm not using this as for my application. So these services are necessary, or these processes are necessary in order to function your operating system. Okay, so for your operating system to work, it also needs some space, it also needs some processes, right? The same way, daemon threads, these are the threads which are there inside your JVM, which actually doing the task of JVM. For in order for JVM to function, it is using this daemon threads. So for example, if a JVM needs to connect to the server, it is using some JNI calls. So these calls go under your daemon threads. Whenever a GC is getting automatically triggered, so GC is a daemon thread. Okay, so this is nothing to do with the application, but these threads are required to run your JVM. Okay. Okay, thank you guys. So I'm done for now. Let's meet, catch up again tomorrow. And before signing off, I've sent you guys an email. Uh, I think before I mean for the previous session, monitoring session, I've seen no one has replied back to the answers. I asked three questions in that email. Let me just quickly open that. I don't know whether you have gone through that email till end of the meets. All the Unix commands that we discussed in monitoring, right? So I sent all those commands. Yeah, so these are the commands that we discussed in the session. And at the very end, I had mentioned you three questions. Okay, so no one has given me the answers for this. So please, if you missed the questions, or if you by any chance if you overlooked it, just please revisit and just let me know your answers. So because it will also help me to focus on what is actually missing, or what I was not able to actually explain a bit more, right? So please go through these questions again and let me know the answers. Okay. So bye. Uh, so you didn't receive it, Chandra. Okay. Okay, let me ask Kumar to include you. I will forward it. What's your email, Chandra? Okay, I have your email also. So I will forward it to you, Chandra. No problem. Okay. So let's conclude today's session. We will catch up tomorrow again, and we will discuss about JVM here. Okay. So see you guys. Bye bye, madam. Good night.